scripture reading for this morning comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verses 25 and 31 through 36. "Who are you?" they asked. Jesus replied, "I exactly who I have claimed to be from the beginning." Jesus said to the Jews who believed in him, "You are truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teaching. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They responded, "We are Abraham's children. We've never been anyone's slaves. How can you say that we will be set free?" Jesus answered, "I assure you that everyone who sins is a slave to sin. A slave isn't a permanent member of the household, but a son is. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you really will be free." The word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, good morning. Oh, and in case I don't see you, who can finish that sentence? Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Who knows what movie that's from? The Truman Show, which way fewer people have seen or remember than I was counting on this morning. But that's okay. It came out in 1998, a year before this church started, and y'all are 30 or under, so I understand that it was, a long time ago. But it's a movie starring Jim Carrey. He plays a character named Truman Burbank, who was adopted by a television production company at birth and raised on television. But he doesn't know it. Every person in his life is an actor. Every location he's ever been to is a set, and he has no idea. At the time, it was commenting on this new thing called reality television. Anyone heard of that? Yeah? And it's only become a more relevant critique of our culture now that we have social media, where we take the lives of fully fledged, dynamic, complicated, deep, dynamic people and reduce them to characters for our entertainment. Fast forward to last year, 2023, Amazon released a show called Jury Duty. It was created by two writers from The Office, and it's basically a mashup of The Office and The Truman Show. They said, what if we took a normal slice of life, like Jury Duty, and filled it with all the zany characters and crazy plots that you're used to from The Office, but what if one person thought it was all real? And that one person was Ronald. Poor Ronald. He was elected foreperson of the jury, and he had no idea that every other jury member, every witness, the judge, the bailiffs, the attorneys, everybody was all an actor, and all around him it was all fake. And I haven't even mentioned the ultimate example of, is reality really real? What movie is the epitome of none of this is real? The Matrix, right, which came out in 1999. I don't know what was in the air or the water in the late 90s, but apparently everybody was really suspicious of reality. Good thing we've gotten over that. Why is this such a common device? Why do storytellers keep going back to it? Why do we keep watching it? I think it's because for all of us, there is some voice in the back of our head. For some of us, it's a whisper. So for some of us, it might be a shout that says, what if that's happening to me? I think we're all prone to some form of conspiracy theory. Now, we're not all JFK moon landing conspiracy theorists. If you are a moon landing one, come and talk to me. I'd like to help you. Some of us might, like politics, government, all that kind of stuff. There are sports conspiracy theories. The refs are in the bag for that other team. You ever heard anyone complain about the refs? And then you look and the other team's complaining about the refs too, right? That's how it always works. There is something that stirs inside of us when we are faced with the questions, is this really all that there is? Is the way that I'm experiencing the world true? Is there something else going on? Is there something more out there? And the answer to these questions is emphatically no, this is not all that there is. We aren't seeing the full truth. There are things going on that we don't see, maybe can't see, and there is something more and better out there. Now, let me pause and say, no, your pastor has not gone off the deep end. I'm not about to roll out a corkboard with images and pins and strings and all that kind of stuff. But nor am I on the other end of the spectrum just saying, well, we're humans and God is God, and so clearly there's God's kingdom and we can't always see it, and that's, I 100% believe that that's true, but I think there is more to it than that. as we continue to explore the ways to close the expectation gap, seeking to experience more of what we believe, we have one more big foundational piece to put into place before we jump into those three specific expectation gaps. So last week we talked about our need to intentionally focus on and make shifts in our relationship with ourselves and with God. This week, we're going to explore 4 core relational dynamics that can infect all sorts of relationships, including our relationship with ourselves and with God. And what they all specifically do, all 4 of these core dynamics, what they do is they actually create a false reality. And unfortunately for us, they tend to build on each other. They tend to work together and feed off of one another, putting us in our own relational Truman Show, to where what we are experiencing and perceiving in relationships and in the world just isn't always fully true. And the scary part as I was prepping it this week is that none of these are going to be new to any of us. These are all quite obvious, and yet we struggle to locate them and surface them. If you were here last week, you might recall that I put up on the screen, put yourself on your conscious list of relationships. And then I asked you to turn to your neighbor and list everyone in your family, and some of you still didn't name yourself. Because some of these dysfunctions are so deep inside of us, they are so ingrained to the way that we see the world, that we have to do something to break free. And with these things, we experience measures of it in almost every relationship that we have, and so we're just incredibly used to it. The first one that Pastor Steve Cuss, author of the book The Expectation Gap, names is assumptions. Assumptions are the way we make meaning of something we think we know, but do not actually know. Assumptions are the way we make meaning out of something we think we know, but do not actually know. Our brains crave meaning, and they run on narratives. If I were to ask you to tell me about your day, you might use 1 or 2 adjectives. Fine, it was good. But if you were to start to actually dig in and tell me about your day, you would most likely tell me a story. That's just how we experience and process the world around us. So what happens when there are gaps in that story, or when there are things that don't make any sense? Our brain can't deal with that discomfort, and so it plugs in meaning or details that may or may not be true. Wow, he's in a bad mood today. I'll bet it's because fill in the blank. Anyone ever said anything like that? Or wow, my triceps are sore. Maybe it's that I lifted myself out of a dunk tank 100 times. It's just an example. I was in a dunk tank last week, and it was awesome, but I was very sore. Sometimes our assumptions are harmless. We make meaning out of things that aren't that meaningful. We make assumptions about people we aren't that close to or may never see again. Or our assumptions are close enough to the truth or actually true. But we also have to admit, even when we hit the nail on the head, it is still an assumption and we don't actually know it. We're just guessing. But how many of you also have been in relationships where assumptions made a negative impact? Someone made an assumption about you, and it hurt the relationship. You made an assumption about someone else, and it hurt the relationship. Or how about this one? You made an assumption about someone's assumptions about you. Anyone been on Facebook during election season? We make giant leaps about what people think and what they must believe based on one link or one sentence, right? We begin to attribute motives to actions. We begin to assign value to people based on what we think they can or can't do, or what we think they do or do not believe. And one of the most insidious ways that these take form are unstated expectations. I go over this in premarital counseling. Unstated expectations can destroy marriages. They can destroy relationships of all kinds, including your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your coworkers. It can destroy your relationship with an organization, including the church. We just assume that people know what we want or what we need, and then when they don't provide that, we ascribe a motive. Well, they should have known, or they did know and they chose not to, and it hurts the relationship. Assumptions almost always put us in a false reality, an illusion. And then, of course, the problem becomes that we aren't relating to God, ourselves, or others as they truly are. The basis for our connection or disconnection is not based in truth. And the bad part about this, too, is that there is a little bit of a hangover even when assumptions get cleared. Have you ever had an assumption about someone and it got proven wrong, and yet you still, for whatever reason, just had that weird hangover feeling because what you felt is stronger than what you know or what you think? We can still have a negative bias towards people even if what we were upset with them about got worked out or straightened out. It's crazy. Now, look, we can't clear every assumption. We are not all detectives. Anyone here a detective? You probably can't tell me even if you are, but none of us are full-time detectives. We don't have time to track everything down. We don't have the depth of relationship to ask people the kind of intrusive questions you would need to understand their motives. Nor do we have time to be paralyzed by all that we don't know. Anyone ever experienced that? You just realize the immensity of what you don't know, and so you just choose not to make decisions anymore. We don't have time for that, but we can make a massive leap forward when we recognize the role that assumptions play, and if we pause and ask ourselves, what do I actually know? And what if the assumptions I am making are wrong? This is critical because assumptions that are left unrecognized begin to escalate, they begin to feed off of each other, they even begin to infect other people, and it becomes the source of our second core relational dynamic, which is reactivity. When we do not get what we think we need in a given situation, we get reactive. But notice, when we do not get what we think we need in a given situation, we get reactive. So can you see how this builds a false reality? It further builds a world, an environment, a context in which we're seeing or experiencing and reacting to things that may not be true or definitely are not true. Pastor Steve in the book notes that it takes very little for us to get sent into reactivity spirals, and we find ourselves expending an immense amount of energy, going in circles and getting nowhere. 3 of the main signals of reactivity in our lives are your anger, your shame, or your core values, and specifically, how you react when someone violates them. How many of you are on-time people? How many of you are lying right now? I'm just kidding. How many of you are on-time people? How many of you, admittedly, are not on-time people? Maybe you aspire to be one, maybe you don't care. All right, on-time people, how did that cavalier attitude of just throwing hands up in the air make you feel? How do you feel when you're in charge of a meeting and someone is always late? How many of you value being prepared for meetings? And how do you feel when someone shows up and it's very clear they're winging it? How we respond when someone violates our core values. Here's an interesting thing. Ask someone who knows you well and cares about you what your reactivity looks like. Because we can experience that on the inside. We know what we think it is. But sometimes the people who know you best actually can tell when you're reactive before you can tell that you're reactive. And Pastor Steve says this, when we're filled with reactivity, we either get bigger or smaller than human-sized. That's how we tend to respond. We get bigger or smaller than human-sized. See if either of these sound familiar. Those of us who get bigger, our mama bear comes out. We begin to dominate. Maybe we raise our voice, we speak a little faster, we start to interrupt other people. Or we begin to offer advice or recommendations that aren't that helpful. Or we offer advice that shrinks a complex problem down to size that is far too small and far too simple. On the flip side, those of us who get smaller, we're like a turtle retreating into our shell. We don't say what we think. We check out. We disengage, we quit, or we appease. You know what? Have it your way. If you really care about this, I'm just going to let you do what you need to do. Or they're always that way, so we just kind of let them do their thing. Or you relieve tension with humor at inappropriate times. When it is time to work something out, you get uncomfortable, and so you try to break the tension. In both of them, getting bigger or smaller, the key idea here is that we no longer feel safe to be who we are. And so we become something else. And here is where reactivity gets really dangerous. It's a form of anxiety, and it is highly contagious, isn't it? It's like it gets in the air and it affects other people. I mean, think about the systems that you're a part of. Think about your workplace. Think about meetings that you've been in. Think about your family. Think about your neighborhood. Think about our church. Have you ever been in a group of people, someone gets anxious, and it just starts catching? It starts spreading, and suddenly people who weren't that nervous start getting nervous. Speaking of getting nervous, I need 3 volunteers, and I'm not going to tell you what you're going to do. Come on, Robert. Thank you for volunteering. I need 2 more volunteers. Yeah, come on up. Come on up. I need 1 more volunteer. Yeah, come on up, Kenitra. All right. We have got a meeting going on. And each of you you're going to want to stand on this mat. No reason. So we've got a meeting, and each of them brings in a little bit of anxiety. And that's represented by what is in their cup. And as the meeting begins, one of them begins to express some anxiety. So you begin to express anxiety, and you pass it to her. Go ahead and pass your anxiety to her. All of it. Just give it to her. Oh, yes. Oh, you must be feeling so much better. The thing, though, is now you start to get worked up, and so you pass your contagious anxiety on to Robert. Go ahead. Pass it all. All right. So you came in nervous. Now how are you feeling?
Great.
You're feeling great. You came in a little bit anxious. Now how are you feeling? You came in just a little bit anxious. Now how are you feeling? Yeah, sure. Okay. See? That is called minimizing. But is this how it actually works? When you infect other people with your anxiety, does your anxiety go away? No, it does not. It just keeps coming back. Okay, so you begin to pass your anxiety. Continue to pass your anxiety. Oh my goodness, it's going around. Okay, now you pass your anxiety. Oh my gosh, it's catching on to Robert. But this makes you more anxious. Keep going. Come on. We only have so much time. This meeting is getting out of hand. Just go for it. It's fine. Just go for it. Just go for it. See, now you're stressing out because he's overflowing. So now you start overflowing, and you're feeling good, and you're passing anxiety all around. You have your own anxiety. Yeah, put me in a dunk tank. See what happens. You can put your anxiety back on the cart. And let's give him a round of applause. See, it is easy to laugh about this, but how many of you have ever been in a meeting that went like this? How many of you have ever been a part of an organization that went like this? Right? It's easy to laugh about it, but when it's not water splashing and it's actually stress and anxiety passing around, that is how you get a coup d'etat in an HOA meeting. That is how you get organizations that end up splitting. That is how people enter a meeting thinking they are coworkers and friends, and they leave sworn enemies. Because this anxiety, it just catches, and passing it to other people does not release it. It just builds on itself over and over again. And here's the problem. Like, we shouldn't blame ourselves. Reactivity actually tends to be a form of self-preservation. We are uncomfortable, and so we have to do something about it. And you know what? I feel like if I get louder, I'm going to feel better. Or if I just kind of sneak away, if I quit, if I get smaller, then maybe they won't see me. That stuff doesn't work. Who are we supposed to turn to when we get anxious or stressed out or face challenges? Are we supposed to look inward and trust ourselves and go with our God? Who are we supposed to turn to? To God. Now think about the last time you were dominated by anger or shame, or you were reacting to someone violating your core values. Did you feel super plugged into God in that moment? My guess is probably not. We'll go through the last 2 a little bit quicker. The third one is stuck patterns. Stuck patterns block our capacity to encounter God because we operate on autopilot rather than by the power and guidance of God's Holy Spirit. Do any of you have a habit or a tendency that you're struggling to break? Something you know you should stop, but you can't. Something you know you should start, but you haven't. chances are pretty good it's because you're in a stuck pattern. How many parents here, either now or in the past, had the age-old fight of getting your kids out the door on time for school? Oh, I'm the only one. Okay, cool. No, right? Yeah, we deal with this all the time. And how often does it happen? Is that like once a semester? Like, okay, good. Today was the bad day. We're through it. How about once a week or once a day, right? Some variable may change. Well, they're sick, or we were up late, or I didn't sleep well. Somebody's reactive, the other person isn't. We're making assumptions. The content of the reason that we're fighting may change, but the fight continues. Maybe I'm just expecting my 6-year-old to act like a 40-year-old. That's not realistic. How about this? Many couples fight in very specific ways. The content of the fight, the issue that sparked the fight may change, but the way you fight and how it ended up being a fight is usually the same. Here's a phrase that's easy to remember. Nothing changes if nothing changes. That comes from the recovery community. It's one of the mantras in AA. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Now, if we're honest, if we're in a stuck pattern with someone else, who do we generally want to change? The other person. Some of you are literally pointing to a specific other person. We generally want other people to break the cycle because we must be doing the right thing. Why would we be doing the wrong thing? But what's the only variable in every relationship that you actually have control over? Yourself. Yourself. And so maybe you ask yourself, what can I do to break the pattern? The last dynamic is attempted solutions. Some problems are actually made worse by our attempted solutions. Now, this one is like assumptions. We are never going to fully remove it from our life, nor should we, because that would mean just leaving all of our problems unsolved. We have to move forward in life. We have to try things. Sometimes we have to make a decision. Sometimes you have to throw spaghetti against a wall. That's how life works. But we also need to become aware of the fact that sometimes our attempted solutions actually throw us into reactivity or throw us into a stuck pattern. Sometimes we're not actually aware that we're even trying to solve a problem. Does this sound familiar to anybody? This example comes from James Clear, author of the book Atomic Habits. Anyone ever flop down on the couch at the end of a workday and scroll your phone? Or anyone ever climb in bed and start scrolling Instagram? And 30 minutes or more go by and you didn't realize it? Do you feel any better? Usually not. Usually not. But what we're doing is subconsciously trying to solve a problem. What's the problem? I'm tired. I'm tired. I worked all day. I might be physically tired. I might be mentally tired. I might be emotionally tired. Maybe I want to shift gears. I don't want to be in work brain space anymore. I want to be in home brain space. And yes, I should have done that in the car on the way home, but I didn't, so I need to do it now. How many of you ever feel like you deserve your first 10, 20, 60 minutes after you get home? I earned some time to myself, especially those introverts. Anybody know someone who ends up in the bathroom for 40 minutes after they get home? And then you don't hear a flush at the end of the 40 minutes. They just needed the time. Does scrolling your phone cure being tired? No. Does scrolling your phone put you in a good headspace? It might distract you, but it's probably not going to put you in a good headspace. Does scrolling your phone work as self-care? No. But what does? Maybe some fresh air? Maybe some light exercise, take a walk, do some stretching. Maybe you still need to use your phone, but you FaceTime someone that you care about. Or maybe you have literal FaceTime with someone you care about in the house you just came home to. Or maybe you read a book. Or maybe you pray. Our habits, our patterns, our attempted solutions, They're easier, so they become addictive, and they put us in a false reality because we think this is the answer. And here's what all of this comes down to. There is only one place that God doesn't dwell in: illusion. God only abides in truth. That comes from Pastor Rich Bellotis, as quoted in The Expectation Gap. There's only one place that God doesn't dwell in: illusion. God only abides in truth. Any one of these core relational dynamics can place us inside of a false reality. But how many of you know that they also work together? And when we let one in, it tends to lead to the next, which tends to lead to the next. And unfortunately, we are usually dealing with more than one. And if we're functioning within a false reality, no wonder we struggle to connect with the God of truth. Now, does this mean we're stuck forever? I hope not. I mean, that's why we're here, right? Because we know we're stuck, and we know we need a way out. And we're here because we believe this might be, or we are confident that this is the way out. The whole story of the Bible is God invading a broken world bound by sin and death under the false reality that sin and death is actually the good thing to do. The whole story of the Bible is God breaking in to free us from that over and over again. One of my favorite illustrations of salvation is the idea that we are locked in the prison cell of sin and death, and there's nothing we can do about it. We can't steal a guard's key. We can't dig out. We can't kick our way out. We can't fashion some sort of device from our bed frame or whatever. We're just stuck. But Jesus comes along and unlocks the prison cell and invites us to come out. Jesus does for us what we cannot do for ourselves. But at that point, we have a choice to make. We couldn't make that choice before. Jesus enabled the choice for us, but we still have to make the choice to step out of the false reality and into the truth, to leave behind sin and death and to follow Jesus. But if we choose to stay in the cell, or like a lot of us, we leave for a time and then we decide to go back in for a little bit of time, I 100% believe that Jesus will come back around and make that offer again. But you know what he's not going to do? He's not going to move in and live with you in your false reality. In our story from the Gospel of John today, Jesus is talking with religious professionals who are very clearly functioning in a false reality. They are supposed to be the ones who have been most ready and waiting for the Messiah. They're the ones who should have recognized the Messiah before anyone else. They've spent their whole life, generations of them have spent their whole life studying and preparing and talking about what it would look like when the Messiah came. And the Messiah comes, and what do they ask him? Who are you? You're an odd bird. And Jesus replies, I'm exactly who I have claimed to be from the beginning. And of course, Jesus means his years of ministry. But when we're in the Gospel of John and you hear the phrase, from the beginning, in the beginning, he's not just talking about 3 years earlier. He's talking about the beginning, in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. God does not change. Now, our understanding of God does change. And sometimes it's right. I'll admit, sometimes it's wrong. But God is the source and the epitome of truth. And Jesus said to those in the crowd who believed in him, you are truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teaching. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That's the good news. It's not a game of chance. It's a certainty. When we follow Christ, we will know the truth, and we will be set free. So how do we merge all this? How do we take our psychology stuff and our Bible stuff and smush it together? Well, Jesus wants to set us free, and now we are more aware of, or can work to become more aware of, the dynamics that are enticing us to stay into the prison cell. If we become more aware of them, we can begin to counteract them. What if when we see them at work, we pause for a moment and say, okay, God, I see this at work. What do I do about it? Maybe with assumptions, we repent. Maybe if it's assumptions about another person, we actually go to them and confess it and ask for their forgiveness. If it's reactivity, maybe we seek to be peacemakers. The way it normally works, when someone in your house gets sick, what happens? Other people get sick. What happened when Jesus showed up in the world and started hanging around with sick people? They got well. What if we asked Jesus for the wisdom and the foresight and the ability to be the one that infects unhealth with health rather than the other way around? And if it's stuck patterns or attempted solutions, maybe we just simply ask for eyes to see and ears to hear and the wisdom to process it all. May we leave today with Jesus' final words in this passage ringing in our ears: if the Son makes you free, you will